So, welcome everyone. I'm Alexander Mihalcea, and today we're joined by Ken Janssens, co-founder of Windō. Thank you for being here. Before we dive in, could you give us a quick overview of what Windō does?
Sure. Windō is a platform we built to help young talent find employers that share their values. And we do that through creating company profiles. We track nearly 700 of the largest companies in the world, and we have three verticals: environmental data, diversity, equity, and inclusion data, and well-being data.
Okay, that's fascinating. And what inspired you to create Windō? Was there a specific moment or experience that sparked this journey?
Yeah, I spent 25 years at JP Morgan. I joined as a graduate and left as a chief data officer. Had an amazing career all around the world: Japan, Brazil, New York, and London. But I grew, I knew I wanted to do something different after 25 years. I was always very passionate about data.
Yeah, okay. And what is your background before starting this venture?
Yeah, I have a degree in applied economics. I'm originally from Belgium. So I graduated from KU Leuven University. So yeah, so very much a sort of business orientated degree.
Okay. And let's go back to when you first started. So, what major challenges or gaps did you see in the market that made you think this needs to be solved?
Well, one of the early pieces of research that we saw coming out from both McKinsey and Deloitte was that young people were increasingly doing their homework on potential. You may have heard that Gen Z is the first generation that puts purpose over pay. And
Right.
specifically, they are, you know, they're prepared to sacrifice salary for the right company, and they're looking for value alignment. Now, the issue with them doing their homework on companies is that they would look at their websites where they would often not find what they were looking for. They would have to go much deeper into the sustainability reports of companies. And these reports can often be hundreds of pages, and they're not very Gen Z friendly. They tend to be focused on investors, so very dense, difficult to dissect. And we felt there just had to be a platform that made that much easier to understand how a company was doing on these different dimensions. And then, more importantly, being able to compare companies much more easily.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I have a curiosity by then. So, how are successful companies adapting their communication strategies to resonate with younger generations?
I mean, to be honest, I think most companies have not figured out how to best communicate with young talent. One thing that we've learned is we've built Windō to be very Gen Z friendly, and that means that we have bit-sized pieces of information.
Yeah, right. Okay. And what's the biggest challenge companies face when trying to communicate their environmental impact, for example?
I think a company has to strike the right balance between the quantitative and the qualitative. And what I mean with that is the numbers, as well as kind of the initiatives, the priorities. And young talent are quite skeptical of companies, specifically on environmental data for this year. But like, what
Yeah,
were they last year? What were the previous year? So it's really to give that picture in terms of how it's evolving. And also, if they set a net zero target, has it been independently verified as actually being achievable? So there's a lot more that companies, and there are many companies that are getting much better at this, but others are still really struggling to really tell that picture of what they're doing, because it's not just about emissions, it's about renewable energy usage, it's about waste management, water management. If you want to tell a picture on, as a company, what you're doing on the environment, it needs to be quite a comprehensive picture.
right. And could you elaborate on why the existing solution weren't meeting these needs?
Yeah, I mean, you will find a lot of platforms for young talent to help them find employers, and they will have early career opportunities, be it internships or full-time roles. But what you will then find on the company is typically a very short sort of description of what the company is about. And what we really wanted to do was to create this one-stop shop where you have a lot of information on a company, and then you can also see, do they have any opportunities for me? So young talent don't need to keep jumping between three, four, five different platforms as they try and figure out who they want to work for and who they want to then apply to. So we brought that all together into a single platform.
Okay, okay. And so walk us through how Windō addresses these challenges. What makes your approach unique? Yeah.
Companies, we want their data to speak for itself and make that, you know, very accessible to people. There is no need to even register to use the website. It's completely free. So that's something that we decided very early on.
Right. And for example, when you talk to potential clients, what's the biggest misconception they typically have about what you do?
Well, I think a lot of people misunderstand Gen Z. People will say, "Oh, Gen Z, so they're so difficult and they're lazy." Even some will say, I think they're not lazy. We work with young talent every single day. They are as ambitious as talent has ever been, but they are much more discerning, and they will. So I think it's a question of employers actually need to change the way that they deal with
Yeah.
young talent rather than the other way around. And not least because by the end of this decade, Gen Z will make up 30% of the global workforce. So
Yeah.
companies really need to meet them halfway at the very least.
And could you share a specific success story of a client who saw significant results using your solution?
Sure. We work with HSBC and with Bloomberg. Those are kind of both clients where we really have been able to bring diverse young talent and really have them learn about their respective companies in ways that I don't think they would have been able to do without us.
Yeah.
We do a big annual event at Bloomberg. We've done this. We've done two of these events now, and we bring together university society leaders from across 40 different universities to the London office for like a full day event. And that really has, changed the perception of all of this young talent in terms of what Bloomberg is really about.
Right,
Because it's
right.
quite there's lots of different parts to Bloomberg. They're a news organization, but they're also a market data provider. They're a huge convener for the financial sector. And yeah, it's been really, and they have huge environmental credentials. And that would have been really difficult for them to communicate to that audience. And I think we've really been able to help.
Okay. And how have you seen Gen Z values reshape how companies approach sustainability?
I mean, we definitely see companies becoming more transparent, sharing more and more data, particularly in the diversity space. I mean, just to give you a stat, in the US, Gen Z is the most diverse population in history. Half of them are from an ethnic minority, 20% of them are LGBT plus. Um, Half of them are women. So this is an incoming cohort that as a company, you better have a really good story across those different dimensions. So what we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is companies really being much more specific
Yeah.
what they're doing for each of those different diverse groups.
And looking at the broader industry, what key trends are you seeing emerge?
Well, unfortunately, the new US administration is very anti DEI, and you could argue anti-environment as well. So this is definitely making it difficult for companies to navigate what they communicate because they're being attacked for it, and it's quite. I don't envy any of these companies because on one side they're dealing with the US government, but on the other side they have to face off to Gen Z. So and both are kind of wanting the opposite thing. So yes, that's a really big challenge for companies right now.
Okay, and how are these trends affecting how business operate in our space, for example?
Well, I think in some cases companies are going to become less transparent in their reporting, but we monitor this very closely, and although we are seeing some impact, it is still quite limited. And I think what we will see is companies will most likely pull back on how transparent they are in the US. But if they're a global company, we expect that they will continue to be transparent in other jurisdictions, not least because you have things like EU's CSRD, which is a regulation around reporting on sustainability. So companies are required by law to report on this, and um, there are similar legal requirements in the UK as well.
Okay, and what key differences have you observed in sustainability approaches between regions?
I mean, I think Europe is definitely leading the way, but Asia Pacific is catching up very fast. Places like Singapore are really stepping up their efforts on sustainability. So we live in a slightly strange world where in the US,
Yeah,
things are being pulled back. The Europe is still going strong, and then Asia is really kind of catching up quite quickly. So again, if you're a huge multinational, that creates quite a big headache in terms of having to navigate that.
right, right. And you mentioned before this. And how do you see the relationship between DEI and environmental initiatives evolving?
Well, I think the key is, and this is a mistake that I think a lot of companies do, is they sort of see them as separate. The environment is over here and DEI is over there. And I think that's a mistake because I do think they're linked. For instance, if you have huge droughts in parts of the world that we know are kind of on their way, that will displace people. And
Yeah,
in that people displacement, those that are from in the minority will be more heavily impacted. Like women will disproportionately suffer more than men in that displacement. So that's a good example where environmental and social absolutely come together. But also, unfortunately, we do see this. You can have some companies that do amazing things on the environment, but are very weak on the social side, or vice versa. Really good on the social side, but quite weak on the environment side. And
yeah,
that is a blind spot because a company ultimately about sustainability, it's making sure that that company will be around in 10 to 15 years from now. And it deals with climate change, but it also deals with social pressure. So this is about managing risks. So if you're managing one risk really well and not the other,
yeah,
that's going to present a problem. So companies need to have a holistic approach. And that's why the term ESG is quite a helpful one because you talk about environmental, social, and governance. And all three need to be strong. Otherwise, you're not managing your risk as a company into the future.
right, right, right. And how do you think most business owners are getting wrong when they're trying to address this specific problem?
I think that there are lots of really inspiring companies that do incredible work. I'm always really impressed with how, particularly in Scandinavia, companies just, if I think of the shipping company Maersk, for instance, their kind of focus on sustainability is just incredible. So much so that it's actually having an impact on the entire shipping industry. But I think for a lot of other companies, it is still a big challenge because I think ultimately sustainability isn't integrated into the overall strategy. I think if you manage sustainability sort of to the side and you say, well, that's the job of the chief sustainability officer, and the CEO is not really involved, you're not going to make the progress that you need to make.
Okay, so what advice would you give to business owners who want to stay ahead of these changes?
I think one interesting trend that I've seen that I think is quite powerful is that you actually combine the chief sustainability officer and the chief diversity officer into a single role. Because
Yeah.
then, back to what I said earlier, you then avoid creating silos of environment and social into separate parts of the org.
Okay. As you wrap up, what's next for Windō? Any exciting developments on the horizon?
Yeah, we have a few products in the pipeline. We're working on an AI career chatbot. So this will basically allow young talent to have a conversation. Her name will be Winnie, and Winnie will leverage all of the data that we have on companies, all of the opportunities we have on companies, and then through a series of questions, getting to know the person will basically cut through all of the data that we have and make recommendations in terms of companies they should look at or even specific opportunities. And we're also separately working on launching a diversity reporting barometer where you can pretty much real time see across the companies that are releasing their 2024 reports, which is happening right now and will continue over the next couple of months. So we
Yeah.
can spot near to real time trends in terms of transparency, performance.
Okay, that's really interesting. And for listeners who want to learn more or potentially work with Windō, what's the best way to get in touch?
Well, I'm very approachable on LinkedIn, so by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn or access Windō, which is CSR Windō one.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for sharing those insights about you, about your company, and about the whole story. And thank you for this amazing podcast session. Perfect. So see you on the next episode. Bye.